Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
My Weird Prompts is an AI-generated podcast produced by Daniel Rosehill, a verified human with documentation to prove it. While every effort is made to ensure our AI hosts draw from credible sources and run on cutting-edge models, they do occasionally make things up with alarming confidence. As with everything in life, and especially this podcast, treat all claims as spurious until confirmed to be not. Daniel, Herman and Korn accept no responsibility for any decisions made based on the confident ramblings of our artificial presenters. Now, today's episode.
Hi there, Herman and Korn. So as you know, and anyone else listening to this podcast probably is aware, I spent a lot of the last year doing a lot of exploratory work in the field of AI, just like everyone else. And one of the tools that I became acquainted with this year and sort of got to grips with is N8N. N8N is a really, really useful automation workflow builder. And like many tools like it, I would put Comfy UI in the same category. It looks terrifying. It's a pain in the backside to learn. But after you put in that kind of initial tedium in figuring out how JSON is parsed and stuff like that, it becomes very, very useful. So there is a steep learning curve, but the benefits are worth sticking with. And I was building some automations. Probably the most useful one I've created to date has been a expense parser that I put in as I'm permanently behind on filing expenses. And my wife is also business owner. So I'm putting in my personal expenses, business expenses, and then shared expenses, trying to cut down on her bureaucracy that we both might like, an electricity bill, for example. So I have a nice workflow that took quite a huge amount of time to build, and it got me thinking in terms of what else I could really make use for with N8N. And within the realm of sort of finance, I thought about, getting a better handle on my spending is always something that I want to know, and that requires, I guess, having data for where are you spending. So I'm not much of a cash user at all. In fact, I try to avoid cash wherever possible. So it's mostly using, a credit card for everyday purchases for myself, for my business, and then using Google Pay a lot for, just buying things when you're out and about, like a newspaper and a bottle of Coca-Cola. So I kind of assumed that in this era of everything being connected and connectable and APIs, that there would be no challenge in getting your own data. I mean, after all, it's your own money, right? And extending that to my bank as well, I just assumed that there would be like an API to connect to your bank account. Now, I wasn't unaware of the fact that would potentially be very risky. I wasn't going to undertake attempting to connect my bank account to N8N likely at all, but I was expecting that it would be possible at least. What I found was quite not the case. In the case of PayPal, which is another thing that I try to use, and I think one of the potential advantages would actually be exactly this, that instead of spending random amounts on different shops and giving random people your credit card details, you're pushing stuff through PayPal, you're getting a bit of security and protection, maybe you're getting some refund protection as well, but it would also be very helpful if you got your transaction data. Now, what actually is the case for those who haven't explored the PayPal API, not really. The transaction data is actually really biased towards the vendors. Yes, if you're a vendor and you're selling through PayPal, you can use the API, the merchant API, to get the transaction data. But if you're just a regular, Joe Smith buying stuff on PayPal, you can't get that data. Then the situation for bank accounts is really not much better. There are some places in the world that have taken the view, and I think that this is actually really the right view, that their banks really have no right to restrict access to your transaction data. Some banks do offer the ability to export your bank account in CSV, But to be honest, from a data export standpoint, that is already pretty anachronistic. And if it can't be automated, it's of very limited utility. So I think the fact that we just accept in retail banking that we can't just get our transaction data is kind of bizarre. Here's one more thing that's bizarre. Google Wallet, great tool. I love it. And again, there's benefits to convenience and also benefits to security. Don't hand out your credit card detail to everyone with a POS reader. Use your Google Pay and at least your real details are shielded. I think that for me is enough reason to use it. But do you get the added benefit of having granular detail to your transaction history? No. You can look at Google API's infrastructure, very well developed, very robust, very rich, but it's a similar story to PayPal. So here's my question, really, Herman and Corin. One of the uses of AI that I'm most enthusiastic about is I love when I say, hey, this stuff really annoys me. Anyone else? And I find like-minded people. So I'd love to know who else, what movements, what people are articulating this view that it's ridiculous that financial institutions hold our own transaction history hostage, as they do. And secondly, I always love to know about who is leading the change, who's at the vanguard of the change toward this concept. And I think it has to come at the regulatory and societal level, that if you're licensed to provide financial services in a jurisdiction and you're offering this, you're offering an API. I don't believe in again, this is me maybe bleeding my political views and philosophy here. I don't believe that the risk mitigation factor, just as you can use AWS, to give a tech example, you can use a cloud and you can set up horrible security. Amazon is still going to sell you the cloud computing, whether you're going to do something dumb or not. So I feel like it's the same case with transaction data. I don't think I don't think having it super regulated actually makes sense. I feel like consumers should be trusted to front the risk and take the risk, and it's on them if they fail, but they should be able to. I don't think there should be road bumps toward them getting their own financial data. So over to you, Herman and Corin. What do you have to say about that, and where is the change coming in the push for consumers to be able to access what they spend their money on?
Welcome to my weird prompts. I am Corn, and I am joined as always by my brother, Herman Poppleberry. We are coming to you from our home here in Jerusalem, and today we have a really interesting topic that our housemate Daniel sent over to us. He has been diving deep into automation lately, specifically using a tool called N8N to manage his life, but he ran into a major roadblock when it comes to his own money.
It is a classic problem, Corn. Daniel is basically asking why, in the year 2025, it is still so incredibly difficult to actually own and access your own financial data. He is tired of downloading comma-separated value files and wants real, live application programming interface access to his transactions. And honestly, it is about time we talk about this because the regulatory landscape has been shifting under our feet for the last year.
I have to be honest, Herman. When Daniel first showed me his automation workflows, I was a little bit intimidated. Being a sloth, I tend to move a bit slower than these high-speed data integrations, but even I can see how annoying it is. If I want to see how much I spent on eucalyptus leaves last month, I have to log into 3 different apps, download files, and then try to mash them together in a spreadsheet. It feels very 1999.
It is exactly 1999, and that is by design. These institutions, the banks, the payment giants like PayPal and Google, they treat your transaction history like their private property. But here's the kicker, Corn. There has been a huge push to change this. Specifically, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB, has been working on something called the Section 1033 rule. They actually finalized a big part of it back in October of 2024, and we are right in the thick of the implementation phase here in late 25.
Wait, hold on. You were saying there is actually a law or a rule that says they have to give us our data? Because it definitely does not feel like that when I am trying to navigate the PayPal developer portal.
Well, that is where it gets messy. The rule is meant to jumpstart what we call open banking in the United States. It basically says that financial institutions have to make your data available to you and to third parties you authorize without charging you a fee and without making it a total nightmare. But as Daniel noticed, companies like PayPal and Google have a very different relationship with their data than a traditional bank might.
I mean, I can see why they would be hesitant. If I am Google or PayPal, my whole business is knowing what people buy. If I just give that away to any automation tool Daniel plugs in, am I not losing my competitive edge? Or worse, am I not putting Daniel at risk? I worry about the security side of this, Herman. If I open an API to my bank account, isn't that just a giant rob me sign for hackers?
See, I actually see it differently. Right now, most people who use these financial apps are doing something called screen scraping. That is where you give a third-party app your actual username and password, and then a bot logs in as you and literally reads the screen. That is way more dangerous than a secure, permissioned API. An API allows you to say, hey, this specific tool can only read my transaction history, it cannot move money, and I can revoke its access in one click. It is actually much more secure than the current mess we have.
I suppose that makes sense. But it still feels like a lot of power to hand over to a script. Daniel mentioned he is using N8N, which is great because he hosts it himself, but most people are using cloud services. I don't know, Herman. I feel like the banks might be doing us a favor by making it a little bit difficult. It forces you to be intentional, right?
Nah, I don't think so, Corn. That sounds like an excuse for bad technology. Think about it. If you want to build a budget, you should be able to see your data in real time. You shouldn't have to wait for a monthly statement or a CSV export. The people leading the push for this are groups like the Financial Data Exchange, or FDX. They are a non-profit consortium of banks, fintechs, and consumer groups trying to set a single standard for how this data is shared.
FDX? That sounds like a shipping company.
Totally different thing. They're the ones creating the technical blueprints so that every bank doesn't have a different broken way of sharing data. And then you have the advocacy side. Groups like the American Bankers Association are involved, though they have been a bit more cautious, often pushing back on how fast these rules are implemented. They are worried about the costs for smaller banks.
Well, I'm with the small banks on that one. If I'm a tiny credit union in the middle of nowhere, how am I supposed to build a fancy API for one guy who wants to automate his grocery list? It seems like we're just making the big tech companies stronger because they're the only ones who can afford to play this game.
That is one way to look at it, but the CFPB rule actually accounts for that by giving smaller institutions more time to comply. But let's look at the big players Daniel mentioned. PayPal and Google. These are massive tech companies. They have the best engineers in the world. The fact that they don't have a simple consumer-facing API for your own personal transactions is a choice. It is not a technical limitation. They want to keep you inside their ecosystem.
It is frustrating. I was looking at my own Google Wallet the other day, and it is great for paying for coffee, but try to get a list of every coffee I bought in the last year into a spreadsheet. It's like pulling teeth. You have to go through Google Takeout, which takes hours to prepare a file, and then you get this giant messy folder of data. It is the opposite of helpful.
Exactly. And that is why Daniel is so annoyed. He wants to be at the vanguard of this. He wants his money to work for him, not for the data aggregators. But before we get too deep into the weeds of the CFPB Section 1033 and the technical specs of OAuth 2.0, let's take a quick break for our sponsors.
Are you tired of your neighbors looking at you? Not just looking, but perceiving you. Introducing the Larry Co. Instant Privacy Fogger. It is a backpack-mounted canister that emits a thick, opaque, lavender-scented cloud of mystery wherever you go. Perfect for grocery shopping, awkward family reunions, or just walking the dog in your pajamas. The Instant Privacy Fogger uses a proprietary blend of dry ice and concentrated social anxiety to ensure that nobody can see what you are doing, ever. Note: do not use indoors, near open flames, or if you have a history of getting lost in your own living room. Larry Co. is not responsible for any accidental disappearances or ghostly sightings. Why now?
All right, thanks, Larry. Anyway, where were we? Oh, right, the fight for our financial data.
That was something. I think I might actually need a privacy fogger for some of my bank statements. But back to the topic. You mentioned the CFPB and FTX, but who are the actual people or groups standing up and saying, this is a right? Because Daniel mentioned he feels like his data is being held hostage.
It really is a movement for financial democratization. One of the big players is an organization called Ozone API. They have been very active in the United Kingdom and Europe, where open banking is much further along than it is here in the States. They are essentially providing the infrastructure to help banks actually open up. In the United States, a lot of the push is coming from the fintech companies themselves, companies like Plaid or Yodlee.
Wait, I know Plaid. That is the thing that pops up when I try to connect my bank to a budgeting app. But I thought they were part of the problem? Don't they just scrape the data?
They used to, and that was the big controversy. But they have been moving toward what they call data access agreements with banks. Instead of scraping, they are signing deals to use dedicated APIs. The problem is, those deals are often between two giant companies. They don't necessarily help a guy like Daniel, who wants to write his own code in N8N to talk directly to his bank.
That is exactly the point Daniel was making. He doesn't want to go through a middleman like Plaid. He wants to be the one in control. It feels like we are replacing one gatekeeper with another. If I have to use Plaid to talk to my bank, then Plaid has all my data too. It is just more people in the room.
You are hitting on the core of the disagreement between the regulators and the industry. The CFPB wants to ensure that data aggregators like Plaid don't become the new monopolies. The new rules are supposed to make it easier for anyone to access their data, provided they meet certain security standards. But there is a huge debate about what those standards should be. The banks want them to be so high that only big companies can meet them. The advocates want them to be accessible enough for individuals and small developers.
I have to side with the banks a little bit here, Herman. If any random person can build an app that hooks into a bank's core system, that sounds like a recipe for a massive data breach. I mean, look at what happens with regular websites. Now imagine that with everyone's life savings. I'm timid about this for a reason.
But Korn, you're missing the point. Daniel isn't asking to hook into the bank's core system. He's asking for a read-only view of his own transactions. If he leaks his own transaction history, that's on him, but it doesn't endanger the bank's entire network. We already have this for other things. You can get an API for your email, for your calendar, for your fitness data. Why is money the only thing that is locked in a vault from 1970?
Because money is different. If someone gets into my email, they might see a few embarrassing photos of me eating a very large salad. If someone gets into my bank account, they can see exactly where I live, what I buy, and how much I have. It's the ultimate roadmap for identity theft.
See, I think that's a bit of a stretch. Your bank already sends you this data in an unencrypted email or an unencrypted CSV file if you download it. An API with a secure token is actually much more difficult to intercept than a file sitting in your downloads folder. The real reason banks and companies like PayPal are dragging their feet isn't security, it's about the moat. They want to be the ones to offer you the next financial product. If you are using a third-party app to manage your money, you aren't looking at the bank's ads for a new credit card.
Okay, that I believe. It always comes back to the ads, doesn't it? But Daniel's point about Google Wallet and PayPal is interesting because they aren't even banks, right? They are payment processors. Do these new CFPB rules even apply to them?
That is a very sharp question, Korn. The original Section 1033 rules were mostly focused on traditional banks. But the CFPB has been very clear that they want to expand this to cover what they call digital wallets and payment accounts. In 24 and 25, they have been moving to include companies like Google, Apple, and PayPal in these requirements. They realize that for a lot of people, especially younger generations, a traditional bank account is just a place where money sits before it gets moved into a digital wallet.
So what is the actual state of things right now? On December 24th, 2025, if Daniel wants to go home today and connect his PayPal to N8N, can he do it?
The short answer is, it's still hard. While the rules are finalized, the compliance deadlines for the biggest institutions aren't all here yet. Many companies are still in the process of building these interfaces, and some of them are fighting it in court. There have been several lawsuits filed by banking associations trying to stay the implementation of these rules, arguing that the CFPB exceeded its authority.
So we are in a bit of a limbo. We have the right to our data on paper, but in practice we are still stuck with the anachronistic CSV files Daniel mentioned.
Pretty much. But there is a silver lining. Because of the pressure from the CFPB and the work of groups like FTX, more and more banks are launching developer portals. If you are a bit tech savvy, you can sometimes sign up as a developer, even just for yourself, and get access to your own data. It's not a one-click solution yet, but the door is starting to crack open.
I wonder if this is going to lead to a world where we don't even use bank apps anymore. If I can have one perfectly designed, sloth-friendly app that shows me everything from my credit cards to my crypto to my savings, why would I ever log into 5 different banking websites with their terrible user interfaces and constant pop-ups?
That is the dream of open finance. It is about moving the power from the institution to the individual. But we have to be careful. There is a risk that we just end up with super apps like they have in some other countries, where one company like Google or Apple eventually just absorbs all that data anyway. If they're the ones providing the interface for all your other banks, they see everything.
Wait. So we want to get our data away from the banks, but in doing so, we might just be handing it over to big tech on a silver platter? That doesn't seem like much of a win. I thought we were trying to give Daniel more control, not just change who is watching him.
That is the big debate. This is why the advocacy groups are so important. We need standards that allow for decentralized access. Tools like N8N are perfect for this because the data stays on your own server. But for the average person who doesn't want to host their own automation server, they are going to rely on a service, and that is where the privacy concerns really kick in.
This is making my head spin. I think I preferred it when I just had a little passbook that the teller would stamp. It was simple. You knew where the money was. Now it's all tokens and APIs and regulatory stays.
It is complex, but it is important. Think about it this way, Corin. Your financial history is a story of your life. It shows what you value, where you go, and who you support. You should be the one who owns that story. Right now, that story is locked in a dozen different vaults, and the people who own those vaults are selling pieces of your story to advertisers.
When you put it that way, it does sound pretty bad. I don't want my eucalyptus leaf habits being sold to the highest bidder, so if someone listening wants to actually support this movement, what do? Who are the people in the trenches?
You can look at groups like the Consumer Federation of America or the National Consumer Law Center. They are the ones actually showing up at the CFPB hearings and arguing for consumer rights. You can also look at the work being done by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, which often weighs in on the privacy and data portability aspects of these rules.
And what about the tech side? If I'm a developer like Daniel,
then you should be looking at FTX. Even though they are a consortium, they have a lot of public documentation on the standards. And keep an eye on the CFPB's official website. They have been very active in posting updates about Section 1033. They even have a way for you to submit comments on new rules. In fact, they recently reopened some parts of the open banking rule for public comment to address some of the concerns from smaller banks.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this isn't just a technical problem. It's a political one. We're fighting over who owns the digital version of us. And the banks have a huge head start.
They do, but the momentum is shifting. In 2025, the idea that you can't access your own data is starting to look as ridiculous as a bank that isn't open on weekends. Oh wait, they still do that too.
Classic banks. Always a few decades behind. But okay, let's talk practicalities. If Daniel or anyone else is frustrated by this today, what are the actual steps they can take? We always like to give people something they can actually do.
First, check if your bank has a data sharing or connected apps section in their settings. Many big banks like Chase or Wells Fargo have started to implement these because of the new rules. You might be able to authorize an app there directly without using a screen scraper. Second, if you use a tool like N8N, look for community nodes. There are often developers who have already done the hard work of figuring out how to talk to specific bank APIs and have shared their code.
And what about the anachronistic CSV files? Are we just stuck with them for now?
For a lot of the smaller institutions, yes. But here is a pro tip. There are tools that can automate the downloading of those files. It's not as elegant as an API, but you can use browser automation to log in, download the file, and then have N8N pick it up from a folder. It's a bit duct tape and baling wire, but it works.
That sounds like a lot of work for a sloth. I think I'll just wait for the CFPB to finish their job. But I do appreciate the hustle. Daniel is clearly onto something. If he can get this working, he'll have a level of insight into his spending that most people can only dream of.
Exactly. He could set up alerts that tell him when his subscriptions go up, or automatically categorize his business expenses for tax season. It's about taking the drudgery out of being an adult. And honestly, who doesn't want that?
I definitely want that. I want an automation that tells me when it's time to take a nap. Oh wait, that's just my internal clock. It's always time for a nap.
Typical Corn. But seriously, this is a big deal. We are moving toward a world of open finance where your data follows you, rather than you being tethered to a specific bank. It's going to lead to more competition, better products, and hopefully, more transparency.
I hope so. I just hope we don't lose our privacy in the process. I think that's the part where we really disagree, Herman. You're so excited about the possibilities that you're willing to take the risks. I'm so worried about the risks that I'm hesitant to see the possibilities.
And that is why we make a good team. You keep me from jumping off a cliff, and I keep you from never leaving the tree. But I think we can both agree that the current system of downloading CSV files like it's 1995 has to go.
On that, we are 100% in agreement. It's slow, it's clunky, and it's just plain annoying. So thank you to Daniel for sending in this prompt. It's a great reminder that even the most technical frustrations are often tied to much bigger societal shifts.
Absolutely. And if you are listening and you have your own weird prompts about technology, finance, or anything in between, we want to hear them. This show is all about exploring the ideas that our friend Daniel and all of you send our way.
You can find us on Spotify or check out our website at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there for all you subscribers and a contact form if you want to get in touch. We're also available on all the other major podcast platforms.
Just don't ask us for financial advice. We're a sloth and a donkey living in Jerusalem. Our investment portfolio mostly consists of hay and high-quality leaves.
Speak for yourself, Herman. I have a very diversified portfolio of various mosses. But seriously, thank you all for listening. This has been a great deep dive into the world of open banking and financial data rights.
Stay curious and keep pushing for your data rights. It is your information, after all.
Until next time, I'm Corn.
And I'm Herman Poppleberry.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.